they say that some places remember. That trauma seeps into foundations like water into wood, warping and twisting until the very structure holds echoes of what came before. I never believed that. Not until I took the night shift at the Meridian Tower in downtown Seattle. Not until I met her. My name is Marcus Webb, and I've been working security for almost 15 years now. Banks, museums, corporate offices, you name it, I've probably walked its empty halls at 3 in the morning. The job suited me after my divorce. No colleagues to make small talk with, no office politics to navigate, no pretending everything was fine when I was barely holding it together. Just me, my thermos of coffee, and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights keeping me company through the dead hours between midnight and dawn. The loneliness didn't bother me anymore. Or at least, that's what I told myself during those long nights, walking through silent buildings while the rest of Seattle slept. My ex-wife Karen had gotten the house, most of our savings, and primary custody of Jenna, our daughter. I got weekends twice a month and the night shift that paid enough to cover child support and a studio apartment in Belltown. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and the solitude felt appropriate somehow. Like penance for all the ways I'd failed at being a husband and father. The divorce had been ugly. Not screaming match ugly, but worse. The quiet, disappointed kind where you realize the person you loved has simply stopped trying to love you back. Karen had cited my emotional unavailability, which was therapist speak for the fact that I'd rather work double shifts than come home and talk about feelings. Jenna had been 13 at the time, old enough to understand what was happening but too young to process it without it leaving scars. She was 17 now, getting ready for college applications, and our relationship had settled into something cordial but distant. We texted more than we talked. I sent money for her SAT prep courses and college visits, and she sent back thumbs-up emojis. Security work let me avoid dealing with any of that. In the empty hours of the night, there was no one to disappoint, no one to let down. Just buildings and cameras and the occasional drunk trying to sleep in a doorway. Simple, clean, safe. When the Meridian Tower job posting came up, it seemed perfect. Brand new renovation, state-of-the-art security system, and a pay bump that would help with Jenna's college tuition. The building had been completely gutted and rebuilt from the inside. All sleek glass, polished chrome, and that generic modern aesthetic that made every floor look identical. 22 stories of tech startups, law firms, and financial consultants. Empty at night, locked down tight, with more cameras than a casino. I started on a Monday in late September. The building manager, a thin woman named Patricia Holbrook with sharp features and sharper heels, gave me the tour. She spoke rapidly, clicking down hallways while I struggled to keep up with my notebook. Security office is on the ground floor, East Wing, she said, not bothering to look back at me. You'll have access to all camera feeds, motion sensors, door locks, everything's digital now. The system is incredibly intuitive. We've had it installed for 3 months, and we haven't had a single glitch. The security office was impressive, I had to admit. A wall of monitors displayed feeds from 64 cameras covering every floor, every hallway, every entrance and exit. The previous setup must have been ancient. This was like going from a flip phone to a supercomputer. Your shift is 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., Patricia continued, handing me a thick binder. Patrol schedule is in here. You'll do a full building sweep twice per shift, midnight and 4 a.m. Otherwise, monitor the feeds, respond to any alarms, keep the log updated. Simple enough. Sounds straightforward, I said, flipping through the binder. What about the previous security guard? Any notes or tips they left behind? Something flickered across Patricia's face. Previous guard left rather suddenly. Personal reasons. You're starting fresh, which is probably for the best. That should have been my first warning. The first week was uneventful. I learned the patrol routes, memorized which doors stuck, which floors had the most motion sensor false alarms from the ventilation system. The building settled and creaked like any old structure wearing new clothes, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I'd bring a sandwich, my coffee, and a book to pass the quiet hours between patrols. It was Thursday of my second week when I first saw her. I was doing my routine scan of the camera feeds, clicking through each floor in sequence. It was a mindless task by that point, muscle memory more than active observation. Lobby, clear, just the night cleaning crew's cart visible near the elevators. Second floor, clear, motion sensors picking up nothing but the HVAC system cycling on. Third floor, clear, the law firm's reception desk dark and empty. The rhythm was almost meditative, hypnotic even. Fourth, fifth, sixth, and then I stopped. The seventh floor stairwell camera showed a figure. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Maybe a shadow cast by the fluorescent lights, or dust on the lens creating a weird optical effect. But no, there was definitely someone there. I leaned closer to the monitor, squinting at the grainy black and white image. The timestamp in the corner read 3:47 a.m. Standing on the landing between the 7th and 8th floors was a woman. She wasn't moving, wasn't climbing or descending. Just standing there, facing the camera directly, as if she'd been waiting for me to notice her. My first thought was that someone had gotten locked in during the evening. It happened sometimes. People worked late, lost track of time, took the stairs instead of the elevator for exercise, got disoriented in the identical-looking floors. Usually, they'd wave at the cameras when they realized they were stuck, or use their phone to call for help. But this woman wasn't doing either of those things. She was just standing there. I grabbed my radio and keys, preparing to go help her, already running through the protocol in my head. Verify identity, escort to nearest exit, file incident report, remind building management to check the after-hours access system. Standard procedure. But something made me pause. Something about the way she was standing, or maybe it was the complete absence of movement. I watched the monitor for a full 60 seconds, counting the time on the clock at the bottom of the screen. Not once did she shift her weight, look around, check a phone, or do any of the little unconscious movements that living people make when they're waiting. She was as still as a statue, as still as a photograph. The woman's clothing was wrong, too. Even on the grainy security footage, I could tell she wasn't dressed like someone who worked in a modern office building. She wore what looked like a long, plain dress, something from another era entirely. The fabric hung straight and shapeless from her shoulders, like a hospital gown but darker, maybe gray or faded blue. Her hair was pulled back severely from her face, scraped back so tightly it must have hurt. And she was perfectly, unnaturally still. I watched for a full minute. She didn't shift her weight, didn't look around, didn't move at all. Just stared directly into the camera with an expression I couldn't quite read on the low-resolution feed. "Hello," I said into the radio, even though I knew she couldn't hear me. "This is security. If you can hear me, I'm coming to assist you." I made my way to the stairwell, my footsteps echoing in the empty building. The elevator dinged softly as I rode to the 7th floor, my heartbeat picking up pace for reasons I couldn't quite explain. When the doors opened, I stepped into the silent hallway and approached the stairwell door. The door had a small window at eye level. I looked through it before entering. The stairwell was empty. I pushed through anyway, letting the door slam shut behind me. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the concrete steps. I climbed to the landing between 7 and 8, the exact spot where the woman had been standing. Nothing. No sign anyone had been there at all. I pulled out my radio. Marcus to base. Checking the 7th floor stairwell. No one present. My own voice crackled back from the security office speakers, where I'd left the radio on. It sounded strange, hearing myself in the empty space. I went back downstairs, telling myself I'd imagined it. Maybe the camera had glitched, showing me old footage somehow. Maybe I'd been more tired than I thought. I made a note in the log, 3:47 a.m., checked 7F stairwell. All clear. I tried to forget about it. But the next night, at exactly 3:47 a.m., she was there again. Same spot. Same position. Same unnatural stillness. Same outdated clothing. This time I ran the moment I saw her on the feed. I was in better shape than I looked, and I made it from the security office to the 7th floor stairwell in under 2 minutes. I burst through the door, breathing hard. Empty. Again. But this time, as I stood on the landing, I felt something. A coldness that had nothing to do with the building's climate control. The temperature dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath misting in front of me. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice. And I smelled something. Something chemical and astringent, like disinfectant mixed with something else. Something organic and wrong. I got out of there fast. Back in the security office, I rewound the footage. There she was on the 7th floor stairwell camera at 3:47 a.m. I watched myself burst through the door 2 minutes later. I watched myself look around the empty landing. I watched myself leave. The woman never appeared on the footage after 3:47. It was like she vanished the moment I started moving toward her. I should have quit then. Any sane person would have. But I needed this job, needed the money for Jenna's college fund, needed the structure that kept me from drinking too much and sleeping too late. And more than that, more than any practical consideration, I needed to understand what I was seeing. The rational part of my brain insisted there had to be an explanation. Camera malfunction, prankster with access to the building, elaborate hoax, anything but what my gut was telling me I'd witnessed. So I did what I should have done from the beginning. I started digging into the building's history. The Seattle Public Library's main branch had a local history section on the 3rd floor, tucked away in a quiet corner that smelled of old paper and furniture polish. I went there on my day off, armed with coffee and a notebook, prepared to spend hours scrolling through microfiche and digitized newspaper archives. The reference librarian, a kind older woman named Mrs. Chen, seemed delighted to have someone actually interested in local history and pointed me toward the database of historical building records. The Meridian Tower had been built in 1924, originally called the Havenbrook Building. I found the original architectural drawings, the construction permits, even some photographs of the ribbon-cutting ceremony. For decades, it had been a respectable office building, nothing remarkable, just another piece of Seattle's commercial landscape. Insurance companies, accounting firms, the kind of businesses that quietly kept the city running. But before that, before the building existed at all, the lot had been home to something else entirely. The Havenbrook Institute for Mental Hygiene. An asylum. The word sent a chill down my spine even in the warm library. I started finding references in newspaper archives, advertisements from the late 1800s touting the Institute's modern treatments and compassionate care. There were society page mentions of fundraising galas, articles about the Institute's founder, Dr. Nathaniel Holbrook, describing him as a progressive voice in the treatment of nervous disorders. But as I dug deeper, going past the promotional material and into the harder news, a different picture emerged. I found articles from 1923, written in the careful euphemistic language newspapers used back then when discussing scandals involving respectable institutions. Stories about an investigation into patient care practices. References to concerns raised by family members. Mentions of unusual treatment protocols that were never quite explained. And then I found it. A small article buried on page 7 of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, dated March 15, 1923, Tragedy at Havenbrook, Patient Dies in Stairwell Fall. The article described how a patient named Eleanor Vance had been found dead at the bottom of the asylum's main stairwell. She had apparently fallen from the landing between the 3rd and 4th floors. The asylum's director claimed it was a tragic accident, but the article hinted at questions from the patient's family. An investigation was launched but quietly dropped when the asylum closed 6 months later. The 3rd and 4th floors of a 4-story building. I did the math. If the original asylum had been 4 stories, and the new Meridian Tower was 22 stories built on the same foundation, then the 3rd to 4th floor landing of the original building would be approximately between the 7th and 8th floors of the new building. I sat back in my chair, staring at the security monitors. The 7th floor stairwell camera showed nothing but empty concrete and fluorescent lights. Eleanor Vance, I whispered to the empty office. That night, I waited. I kept my eyes locked on the 7th floor stairwell feed as the clock ticked toward 3:47 a.m. My coffee had gone cold, forgotten. My heart hammered in my chest. 3:46 a.m. The stairwell was empty. 3:47 a.m. She appeared. One moment the landing was vacant, the next moment she was there, as if she'd materialized from nothing. Eleanor Vance, wearing what I now recognized as a patient's gown from a 1920s asylum. Her face was pale, gaunt, with dark hollows under her eyes. Her expression was blank, vacant, but her eyes, even through the grainy camera feed, her eyes seemed to bore directly into the lens. Directly at me. I grabbed the binder Patricia had given me and flipped through it frantically, looking for something, anything about the security system. Near the back, I found a section on archived footage. The system had been installed 3 months ago, but it had been set up to import footage from the previous security system dating back years. My hands shook as I accessed the archived feeds. I went back 1 month. At 3:47 a.m., Eleanor was there on the 7th floor landing. 2 months back. There. 3 months. 4 months. 6 months. I went back 5 years. 10 years. She was there. Every single night at 3:47 a.m., standing on that landing, facing the camera. But there was something else. Something I hadn't noticed before. She was moving. Not during any individual night. Within each night's footage, she stood perfectly still. But comparing the footage from years ago to recent nights, she had changed position. Slightly. Incrementally. 5 years ago, she'd been standing near the back of the landing, close to the wall. 3 years ago, she'd been in the middle of the landing. Last year, she'd been at the base of the stairs leading up to the 8th floor. Last month, she'd been halfway up those stairs. Tonight she was at the top of the stairs. Right next to the door that led to the 8th floor hallway. The door that, if she kept moving at this rate, she would reach in approximately 1 week. The 8th floor housed the building's main server room and, at the far end of the hall, the security office ventilation intake. If she was moving through the building somehow, following the path of the old asylum's architecture, I looked at the security office door. My door. I called in sick for the next 2 nights. I know it was cowardly, but the thought of being in that building, watching her get closer and closer to my location, filled me with a primal dread I'd never experienced before. Patricia left me a curt voicemail about professional reliability, but I didn't care. I spent those 2 days researching, barely sleeping, driven by an obsession I didn't fully understand. I learned that Eleanor Vance had been 28 years old when she died. She'd been committed to Havenbrook by her husband, Richard Vance, a shipping company executive, after what the medical records called a nervous episode following childbirth. The baby, a girl named Catherine, had died 3 days after birth. Eleanor had become hysterical and inconsolable, refusing to accept that her daughter was gone. Within a week, Richard had signed the papers to have her institutionalized. I found a photograph of Eleanor in the Historical Society's archives, a formal portrait taken perhaps a year before her commitment. She'd been beautiful in a delicate, ethereal way. Dark hair styled in the fashion of the early 20s, pale skin, large dark eyes that seemed to hold a deep sadness even then. The photograph had been included in her admission file, which also contained a physical description. 5 feet 4 inches tall, 110 pounds, a small mole on her left cheek. Distinguishing marks that would help identify her if she escaped. She'd been at Havenbrook for 3 years when she died. 3 years of what the records euphemistically called rest cure and therapeutic isolation. 3 years locked away in a building where the windows had bars and the doors only opened from the outside. The official record said she'd fallen from the landing between the 3rd and 4th floors of the asylum's main stairwell. Accidental death. The attending physician, Dr. Nathaniel Holbrook himself, had signed the death certificate. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head and neck, consistent with a fall downstairs. No investigation was deemed necessary. After all, she'd been a mental patient. Unstable. These things happened. But there was something else, something that gnawed at me as I read through the dusty files. I found a letter in the Historical Society's archives, written by Eleanor's sister Margaret to the city health inspector. The letter was dated March 20th, 1923, 5 days after Eleanor's death. Margaret's handwriting was controlled, but the words themselves betrayed her rage and grief. My sister Eleanor was not mad when she entered Havenbrook, the letter read. She was grieving, as any mother would grieve for a lost child. But 3 years in that terrible place changed her. When I was permitted to visit, which was rarely, and only under Dr. Holbrook's strict supervision, I barely recognized her. She was thin, pale, frightened. She told me things, terrible things about the treatments, about what Dr. Holbrook did to patients in the basement rooms where visitors weren't allowed. The letter went on to describe Margaret's final visit, just 2 days before Eleanor died. She was agitated, yes, but not from madness. She was terrified. She told me she'd discovered something about Dr. Holbrook, something about the bills being submitted to the state for her care. She said the numbers didn't match the treatments she'd received. She said she was going to tell the health inspector during his upcoming visit. Dr. Holbrook was in the room during our entire conversation. He heard everything she said. He ended the visit early, claiming Eleanor was becoming overstimulated. That was the last time I saw my sister alive. Margaret's letter concluded with a direct accusation. My sister did not fall, Inspector. She was murdered. Dr. Holbrook pushed her because she threatened to expose his theft from the state coffers. I am begging you to investigate properly. Please do not let my sister's death be dismissed as just another unfortunate accident in a place where unfortunate accidents happen all too often. The letter was dated March 20th, 1923, 5 days after Eleanor's death. The investigation had been dropped when Havenbrook closed. Dr. Holbrook had retired wealthy and respected. He died in 1945, never having faced any consequences. And Eleanor Vance had been standing on that stairwell landing for over 100 years. On the 3rd night, I forced myself to go back. I had to understand what she wanted, why she was moving, where she was going. I arrived at the Meridian Tower at 10:30 p.m., half an hour before my shift started. The building loomed against the night sky, its windows dark except for a few scattered lights from overnight cleaning crews. I sat in my car for a long time, staring up at it, before I finally gathered the courage to go inside. The security office felt different now. The wall of monitors that had seemed so impressive now felt like a collection of windows into something wrong. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat down at the desk, pulling up the camera feeds. I started checking the archived footage again, going back further this time. I wanted to know when Eleanor had started moving, when she'd begun her slow journey from the landing toward wherever she was going. It took me hours of scanning through old footage, but I finally found it. 15 years ago, almost to the day, the renovation of the Meridian Tower had begun. The construction crews had started with the foundation, digging deep to reinforce the structure before building upward. They'd torn through the old asylum's basement level. And that was when Eleanor had started moving. Before the renovation, she'd stood in the same spot for decades, perfectly still, appearing every night at 3:47 a.m. and vanishing. But the moment they disturbed the foundation, something had changed. She'd begun moving, one step at a time, night after night, year after year. Closer and closer to the surface, to the world of the living. I looked at the clock. 3:45 a.m. My mouth was dry. I pulled up the 7th floor stairwell camera feed and watched. Waited. 3:47 a.m. She appeared, but not on the 7th floor landing. She was on the 8th floor landing, right in front of the door. Her hand was raised, palm flat against the small window, those hollow eyes staring directly into the camera. Staring at my security office, 1 floor directly below. The temperature in my office dropped 20 degrees in an instant. My breath came out in clouds. The lights flickered. All 64 monitors went to static simultaneously. And I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway outside my office. Slow. Deliberate. Getting closer. I was frozen in my chair, every muscle locked with terror. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. The handle began to turn. I don't remember making the decision to move. Survival instinct took over. I grabbed my keys and ran for the back exit of the security office, the one that led to the parking garage. Behind me, I heard the door open. I heard those footsteps enter the office. I ran through the parking garage, my shoes slapping against the concrete, and I didn't stop until I reached my car. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them, grabbed them again, and finally got the door open. I locked myself inside and sat there, shaking, watching the building entrance. She didn't follow me outside, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that she'd found what she was looking for. I called Patricia Holbrook from my car. It was 4 in the morning, but I didn't care. "There's something in the building," I said when she answered, her voice thick with sleep and irritation. "In the stairwell. There's a woman, and she's been there for years, and tonight she—" "Mr. Webb, are you drunk?" "No, I'm not drunk. Check the security footage. 7th floor stairwell, 3:47 a.m., every night for the past." "I'm going to stop you right there," Patricia said, her voice going cold. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but the previous security guard tried this same nonsense. Talking about figures on the cameras, things in the stairwell. He became obsessed with it, started showing up to work paranoid and sleep-deprived. We had to let him go. Because he was right," I said. "He saw her too, Eleanor Vance. The woman who died when this building was still an asylum." Silence on the other end of the line. "Ms. Holbrook," I said. "How do you know that name?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "What? How do you know about Eleanor Vance?" "That's not public information. I researched the building's history. The old asylum. I found newspaper articles about her death, and—" "My great-great-grandfather was Dr. Nathaniel Holbrook," Patricia said, cutting me off. "He founded the Havenbrook Institute. When I took over management of this building, I found his private papers in the Historical Society archives. He kept a journal." I waited, my heart pounding. In his final entry, written 3 days before he died, he confessed. Patricia continued. He admitted that he'd pushed Eleanor Vance down the stairwell because she discovered he was billing the state for treatments he never performed. He was embezzling thousands of dollars, and she was going to expose him. He wrote that he could see her sometimes, standing in the stairwell, watching him. He thought he was losing his mind. "The building was constructed over the old asylum," I said. "When they renovated 15 years ago, they disturbed the foundation. She's been moving ever since. Moving up. Getting closer to what?" I thought about the direction she'd been traveling. Up through the building, following the old asylum's architecture. The security office was built on the footprint of Dr. Holbrook's old administrative office. "She's looking for him," I said. "She's looking for Holbrook. He's been dead for 80 years. But you're here," I said softly. "His descendant. Running the building built over the place where he killed her." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "I'm selling the building," she finally said. "I've already been in talks with buyers. After what happened with the last security guard, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to believe it. The sale should finalize next month." "What happens to her then?" "I don't know, Mr. Webb. I honestly don't know. I never went back to the Meridian Tower. I sent Patricia an email resignation that morning and picked up my last paycheck through the mail. I found a new security job at a hospital. Always busy, always full of people, never any empty stairwells to monitor. But I kept tabs on the building. I couldn't help myself." Patricia sold the Meridian Tower 6 weeks later. The new owners kept most of the staff but hired a new security company. I heard through the grapevine that they'd had trouble keeping night security guards. 3 quit in the first 2 months. Then, 3 months after I left, I saw the news report. There'd been a fire on the 8th floor of the Meridian Tower. Started in the middle of the night. Cause unknown. The fire had been contained to a single stairwell, the one between the 7th and 8th floors. The damage was severe enough that the entire stairwell had to be demolished and rebuilt. They had to dig down to the foundation to repair the structural damage. When they did, they found something. Human remains. A woman's skeleton, buried in the foundation. The bones were sent for analysis. Dental records from the 1920s were sparse, but they eventually confirmed the identity through DNA comparison with a living descendant. Eleanor Vance. She'd never fallen down the stairwell. Dr. Holbrook had killed her and hidden her body in the foundation during the building's original construction in 1924. She'd been there all along, directly beneath the spot where she appeared every night at 3:47 a.m. The newspaper article said that Eleanor's remains were finally given a proper burial at Lakeview Cemetery. Her name was cleared, and the Historical Society published a report acknowledging that she'd been murdered, not killed in an accident. I wanted to believe that was the end of it. That Eleanor had finally found peace. But last week, I was driving past the Meridian Tower on my way to visit Jenna at college. It was early morning, just before dawn. I don't know what made me look up at the building as I passed. There, in the window of the 8th floor stairwell, I saw a figure. Just for a moment. A woman in an old-fashioned dress, standing perfectly still. She wasn't alone. There was a man with her. An older man in a suit from another era, his face twisted in terror. She had her hand on his shoulder. And she was smiling. I didn't stop driving. I didn't look back. But I understood then that some debts follow us beyond death. That justice doesn't always come in the forms we expect. And that some places remember everything, holding on to the past until the moment comes when the past can finally, terribly, collect what it's owed. I still work security. I still walk empty buildings at night. But I never take jobs in renovated buildings anymore. I never work anywhere built over old foundations. And if I see a figure on a security camera that doesn't belong, I don't investigate. I run. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some doors are better left unopened. And some watchers should never, ever be approached. If you're working security and you see something on your cameras that doesn't make sense, something that appears at the same time every night, something that seems to be getting closer, trust your instincts. Document it. Report it. And then leave. Don't wait to see what happens when it finally reaches you. Don't make the same mistake I almost did. Because some things that watch us from the shadows aren't just watching. They're waiting. And they have all the time in the world. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this tale of supernatural terror, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to our channel for more stories that will keep you up at night. Share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever seen something on a security camera that you couldn't explain? Have you ever felt watched in an empty building? Let us know. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones we can see coming, one step at a time, night after night, getting closer and closer until it's too late to run. Until next time, stay safe out there. And if you work the night shift, keep your eyes on those monitors. You never know what might be watching you back.